Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of LBMC Cybersecurity Sense. This is your host, William Parks, back again with another monthly episode for PCI information. We have on the line with us Andy Kerr and Kyle Hinterberg. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing today?
Feeling pretty
Fantastic.
good.
I just realized I feel like every time I do this, it sounds like an airplane, kind of like you're on the plane, the pilot's talking. Yeah, listen, everybody, we're going to be taking off going. Sounds, yeah. Anyway, the same spiel. But anyway, guys, so welcome back to another episode. In good fashion, we do a requirement for PCI per month, and this month is requirement 11. With every episode, we usually have Kyle kick off with some news. So, Kyle, take it away, my man.
Sure thing. There's really two big pieces of news. The first is by the time this episode comes out, 4.0 should be, the official only version of PCI that's out there. We're
Yeah.
just right now when
Oh,
we're recording
yeah.
this right at the end, but as of April 1st, 3.2.1 is going to be retired and everything's going to be over onto 4.0. So, if you haven't heard, all three of us been preaching that for the last year. That was your last chance. Get out there and get on 4.0 because you're
No excuse.
literally out of time.
No excuses.
The other fairly significant piece of news that's just come out in the last couple of weeks is around the INFI worksheet, the items noted
Yeah.
for improvement. Um, any folks that have really been following along with all of 4.0 will remember way back when 4.0 was first released, like some of the first draft issues of it, they had another item in there for, you could mark a control as either in place or not in place, and they had an option for in place with remediation, which really just meant like, hey, the QSA looked at this, determined that you're in place. You had some minor misses in the past, but it's still in place now. It's good enough, essentially. So you're in place with remediation. But everyone pushed back on that. It seems like a lot of people threw fits around it. They didn't like the fact that you were kind of airing dirty laundry by saying they're in
Mm-hmm.
place with remediation. So the
Right.
council removed
Mm.
that. Instead, they released this thing called the Items Noted for Improvement Worksheet. And the idea there was, as a QSA goes through your assessment, we're going through, we mark down every time we note something that was essentially out of place. And
Right.
then, more than likely you get it back into place before the end of the assessment. We can then mark it as in place on the rock. You can't tell, again, that in place remediation is gone, just as in place. But we have this external worksheet that says, kind of all your issues that we identified, and then we provide that to you at the end of the assessment. And no one else sees it. So again, it's, not so much airing of dirty laundry. And that's, been kind of the expectation for the last 6 months or so. I'm sure that there's, been a good few organizations that have received INFI worksheets,
Mm-hmm.
but now that's been killed. And so now there is no more INFI worksheet. There is no more items, or in place with remediation. We're kind of back to where we were with 3.2.1 when it comes to marking something as in place or not in place. You're either there or you're not. Um, yeah, I don't know, Andy, I'll let you probably take it from there a little bit to give some of your thoughts, because I feel like we're in a weird place as far as all of this goes. I like the thoughts the council had, but now we're a little bit back to square one.
Yeah, absolutely. I could tell you there was a lot of my clients, that really like the idea of the accountability. We are calling things out. They are able to remediate them. But if there was a gap, something that they could fix before the end of the audit, they were happy with it. Yeah, but we've documented it. I think what we're in now, and again, this is I'm curious to see what the council's gonna come up with. I mean, again, ultimately they're gonna have to address this because of the some of the rigidity that has been placed on timelines as far as the things that have to take place. Whether that's 90 to the quarterly, biannually, annually, how often things have to happen. They've defined those timelines now. That this is what it is. Or either that or your targeted risk analysis. They're going to be defining what periodic is for you. So the question comes up is if you surpass those, if you're supposed to be doing your ASV scans or your internal vulnerability scans, or any of these quarterly biannually reviews of many of these items in 4.0, and you miss, you're outside that timeline. And even though PCI has now stated this is what it is, does that mean a failure? How are we as QSAs to address this with with the merchants and service providers? And does this mean that no, you have to take a failure, or I mean, because there's no compensating control on something that happened in the past. There's nothing that you can do, go back in time and say 6 months ago we were supposed to run a scan and we were 20 days late. for whatever reason, Bob left, or whatever it may be. So I feel like the the INFI or INFI document, however you want to say it, was a good tool to kind of give some leeway in those instances where those types of occurrence happen. So I really want to hear what the council is going to have to say about this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And two, just to, help clarify too, really for everyone listening, there tends to be two types of failures that we identify as, QSAs when we're working through things. One is more of the point in time, and then the other is the scheduled. When it comes to any of the point in time, like we're looking at a system that's supposed to have, 8-character passwords now with 4 or 12-character with 4.0, and we see, hey, this system only has 8-character passwords, and then it's remediated before the end of the assessment. We look at it again, that's a point in time assessment. We see that that meets that requirement. It's all good to go. And that's, been true in the past. It's true now. It was true with the INFI or INFI worksheet. But the big benefit with the worksheet was for those scheduled items. The big one, which it works out well, talking about requirement 11 here, is scans. If you have all your scans for the past 12 months, but you missed one 9 months ago, historically, that has meant you are non-compliant until you have 4 quarters of passing scans. And so, you could have an organization that's basically held in compliance limbo for 6 to 9 months until they get that history of scans. And that was where this worksheet allowed a way out of that, in a sense, not by reducing security, but just saying, hey, we see that there was this, unforeseen, unpreventable, essentially, circumstance that caused this issue. We're not going to punish you. We're going to have this way through it to allow you to be compliant. And there is still, if you go look at the PCI Council, they released a blog post about the removal of the INFI worksheet, and they kind of lay out that, hey, if you've had some minor misses, your QSA can still kind of work with you, and still kind of left the door open for that, but it's not nearly as well-defined or as official feeling as it was with the INFI document. At a minimum, it would have been nice if they would have left that, I feel like, as a guidance document that could be used optionally, instead of just entirely removing it.
Yeah, 100% on that. And I think where Visa, had made a stance on this on several different occasions, in regards to, like, for instance, as an example, of an ASV scan. You miss an ASV scan, that's a failure. You need to reach out to your, if you're a merchant, you need to reach out to your service provider. Excuse me, your service provider, your acquirer. You need to reach out to your acquirer and then, speak with them about, hey, what needs to happen here. In addition, as a service providers, you need to be reaching out to Visa. So if you're a service provider, you miss an ASV scan, you need to be reaching out to Visa and letting them know, hey, what needs to happen here. So I'm curious with 4.0 if these time-based requirements running into these same issues, is it going to be a situation where, hey, we missed a time-based issue and we need to be reaching out to our acquirer? If we're service providers, we need to be reaching out to Visa. And what is our guidance? What is our direction here? That's what I have to say.
So
Absolutely. It'll be one of the things I'm interested to see if there's more information from the council, specifically at the community meeting this year, or beyond that, to see if they give more guidance there. Because, really, obviously, at the end of the day, it's always up to like an acquirer to determine compliance of their relevant merchants or the card brands ultimately. But it was nice with the INFI worksheet to allow us as QSAs to provide some guidance and help with our clients beyond just saying, go to your bank, because it never feels good just to, pass the buck like that. But right now it's feeling like with these changes, we're forced a little bit back into that mentality.
Yes.
Man, so it sounds like the council's receiving a lot of questions from this. So we're expecting most certainly some answers about this. Okay, cool. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen who are listening, are you ready for requirement 11? I need to throw on like some kind of soundtrack here in the background, like a walkout for a WWE match or something.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, what's the walkout song for this?
If you smell what the Rock is cooking. Literally, the Rock.
Hey, that's true. But all right, guys. So this is requirement 11. The title of this one is Test Security of Systems and Networks Regularly. So let's dive in.
I feel like this is either can be either the easiest or the hardest requirement depending on how stuff is set up. Because if, you know, at a high level, it's basically doing scans. It's a lot of scans, and penetration testing is basically what requirement 11 is around. And if you have all those scans, you have, you know, passing scans, you have your pen tests, it's basically, hey, here's all our scan reports, review them, you're good to go. But, you know, like we were just talking about with the INFI worksheet, if you're missing a scan, all of a sudden this becomes the hardest requirement because you can't go back in time. And basically all of the parts, all the sub requirements in 11 are all those time scheduled based requirements. None of it is point in time. You know, you have to have the whole history behind it to be able to get through this one.
100%.
100%. And, you know, obviously the first change there is, again, policy and procedure, you know, roles and responsibilities. That's just a default. You know, everyone should be used to that. The next one, the next requirement in it is still testing for rogue wireless access points, which nothing has really changed there. That still more or less exists. And I feel like that's, I feel like a lot of clients always struggle with that one because it's like, what are we even testing for here? You know, it's I sometimes feel like that's a testing requirement from the 90s, because I don't really feel like rogue wireless access points are that big. You know, like, William, in your view, when's the last time that you got in pen testing an organization by jumping onto a rogue wireless access point?
I don't think I've actually ever done that. I really don't.
Nowadays, you know, I feel like the main threat from that was back when people like wanted Wi-Fi and they would, you know, plug an access point into a random port and get on it. But now people all have Wi-Fi on their phones. They have data on their phones. They have hotspots on their phones. So it's not as big of an issue, but it's still a requirement. You still need to do it. If you have in-scope networks, you need to be testing for wireless access points. And it still more or less exists the way it always has. So, you know, still need to do that. It's still important, still a requirement.
I will say there are some really cool security solutions that kind of fight that, because we'll stand up rogue access points that mimic the SSID of other company Wi-Fi's. And I think it was Cisco was the one that really impressed me, because it essentially just shut it down and blocked it off. Like you couldn't even see
Marshal.
it. Yeah. It was cool. I was like, okay, I've never seen this before. It's neat.
Well, and you know, and the other one that's, and again, this, you know, Kyle was kind of alluding to this one already in regards to the internal vulnerability scan. So this was going to be one. I want to see how this is going to go. I'm very curious about this. Now, this one's not going to be applicable to 2025, but essentially, the internal vulnerability scans traditionally have been criticals and highs. You've addressed these from quarter to quarter, or there's some sort of documentation, mitigation. Hey, we don't use this module. This is why this keeps showing up, or, you know, this is a false positive, whatever these may be. So the other kind of piece to this is going to be in the new 11.3.1.1. So anything that is, you know, criticals and highs, you've addressed those, but what about all these mediums and lows? So, you know, we just leave them on the scans forever and, you know, it's no problem. So what PCI is saying now is, all right, there needs to be some sort of addressment, I guess, addressment of these other ones based off of the targeted risk analysis. So again, here's another targeted risk analysis that needs to be done. So somehow or another, the entity needs to be able to go, all right, what is our time span? What is our frame that we're going to be addressing these mediums and lows? Is it, you know, hey, we need to have these knocked off every 3 months or every 6 months, or, you know, whatever it is. Now, it's absolutely understandable how sometimes these mediums and lows are so petty. People tend to look at these and just kind of discard them. However, I will say this, SMB signing shows up as a medium. So this can be extreme. And Will, you can speak to this. You've seen how this is exploited. And I used to be a pen tester too. So, you know, this can be in conjunction with other things. When you're sitting there, you know, capturing hashes, listening on the network, then you've got devices out there without SMB signing that's required hello access.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. SMB is a pretty big staple in a lot of compromises. Some of the worst compromises or exploits in the past decade have been due to SMB. So
I would say this is where a big part of requirement 6 comes in, to actually do vulnerability re-ranking. Again, this is where I know most organizations just don't feel like they have the time or whatever it might be, but to go through and rather than just saying anything that whatever scan tool, we're using Tenable, we're using Rapid7, we're using Qualys, whatever it is, just automatically saying anything that it classifies as high or critical is what we're taking care of, and anything it does as medium and low or not, don't take that as gospel. You have to read those reports and re-rank them accordingly. Maybe there's things that it's flagging as a critical that don't actually apply to you because you have other mitigations in your environment, and maybe you see a lot of SMBs that are mediums, and it's like, hey, these should actually be ranked as high in this scenario, and we need to take care of them sooner. And so, go through that and re-rank them. And maybe you have a bunch of lows that should actually be, essentially informational because they can't exploit your network. But, do that first before you, try to remediate. Figure out what the criticality really is to your organization.
100%. And along with that, hand in hand with this one, is making sure that, hey, now everybody's got to be doing authenticated scans. This is something we're going to be looking for. I know large entities, because of the sheer number of things that can be in scope, sometimes they may not be running authenticated scans. So this is now PCI has come out and said, hey, 11.3.1.2, you have to run authenticated scans now. So this is going to be challenging. So I'm hoping, we've been talking about this for over a year now. I'm hoping folks have already made those steps to implement, to say, all right, we're running authenticated scans. We have a stronger vulnerability, scanning and patching, and, we're on top of these things. And to Kyle's point, ranking.
Yeah, I would say too, another thing to keep in mind for the authenticated scans is, sometimes it's easy to do that. Like if you're running an agent on a lot of your servers and workstations, that agent might be getting you those authenticated scans, but more than likely that agent is going to run on your networking equipment or, other devices like that. And so that's where you're going to possibly have to think a little bit harder about how you're going to, potentially run authenticated scans against your firewalls or other devices to make sure that they're, getting that same quality information as you would on the servers or other devices that can run the agent itself in those cases. One other thing too is kind of on the ASV scans. Nothing has really changed there so much, other than what we were talking about earlier about making sure you're hitting those timeframes. That's going to become more critical than it ever really has in the past, since those timeframes are being laid out. But one thing I feel like that is a big change when it comes to ASV scans that people might not be aware of is if you are doing an SAQA. And so for anyone who isn't, fully aware, there's the SAQs, which are the self-assessment questionnaires. They're essentially a smaller set of requirements for organizations that have specific payment channels and kind of a reduced scope. And an SAQA applies to organizations that are doing e-commerce transactions and either have a fully hosted payment page, or they're using an iframe to, again, host that payment page for them. So they're not receiving credit card information directly. It's all being entered right into essentially a payment gateway. In that case, there has never been a requirement for that page that's hosting the iframe or doing the redirect over to the hosted payment page to need an ASV scan, but 4.0 is going to require ASV scans for them. So if you're using essentially now any form of e-commerce, you need to be doing an ASV scan. There's no out by just moving to an iframe. You still need to do that now.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions from one of my clients that was asking me about that. He was a little confused about, the ASV scan portion of it. And so they had a lot of questions like, am I supposed to be scanning my third party that's taking? No. You deal with your stuff, your e-commerce, whatever is pointing out there to the world. That's what you're scanning. That's the ASV scan. So don't be trying to, whoever your third party is, like, well, here's their IP address that we're sending the app. Don't scan them. You scan yourself. So yeah, that's a good one that I've had to clarify.
Yeah, the thing to think about there is really the risk that you're imposing potentially on someone's credit card information is if someone infected your site or did something to cause it to redirect to, hackme.com or, to inject some JavaScript into that iframe or something like that. And so that's where you're scanning now your site to make sure that you are pulling the iframe you expected, you are redirecting where you expect to be redirected. You're essentially looking for vulnerabilities that might affect those types of things. Yeah, but never scan a third parties. That should be their compliance obligations, and you should be collecting their attestation that says they're doing scanning as they need to do.
Correct. So another one that we don't run into a whole lot because most of our merchants and service providers are not necessarily multi-tenant service providers. Um, I have a merchant that's actually a service provider as well. But again, this is one where um, there's some penetration testing requirements that have to take place. This is a brand new one for 11.4.7. Um, so this one is just something else to make sure that those multi-tenants, when you've got like multiple people on the same, and again, I'm thinking cloud type technologies, they're going to have to do this, so this is something to keep in mind for all those folks out there. Again, just a minor requirement. Most of those folks are probably doing this anyway, but this PCI has kind of called this one out specifically.
Yeah. And in general, when it comes to kind of the penetration and segmentation testing, not a lot of changes there for 4.0, but one change that I really like is 11.4.4. And that's historically, if you read PCI, DSS 321, it said that you had to remediate any exploitable vulnerability or
Yes.
any exploitable finding, which to me is so vague because, like, hey, I can exploit this. It doesn't do anything, but it was still exploitable. There's no,
Right.
potential risk. And so it didn't take any risk into consideration, only exploitability, which to me didn't really help organizations with determining what they needed to fix. And so now it's been changed that exploitable vulnerabilities need to be fixed according to your risk ranking methodology. So when
Yeah.
you're, hey, we had this pen test, they had these vulnerabilities, they had these findings, these are highs, mediums, lows, you can now take that similar to scans and, kind of like we talked about in requirement 6 and go through that and say, hey, the highs we're going to fix in a week or a month, the mediums get 2 months, whatever that might be, but just follow your policy and practice and then fix them accordingly. And that also helps when you're getting an assessment, if I've had times where, an organization is doing a pen test, like right when they should be getting their rock. And now all of a sudden they have all these findings. And now we need to wait till they get a clean scan or a clean pen test before we can issue that rock. Otherwise they have these outstanding findings. Now they can just show, hey, we got this pen test, we're remediating according to our process, and they're still compliant and don't necessarily have to wait for that, retesting of findings from their pen test.
Yeah. So another one, again, this is kind of a little bit of an added piece here that I know that a lot of people are not doing, and this is going to be the detection of covert. Well, in IDS IPS has always been a thing. Hey, we're alerting, we're responding, but now PCI has called out specifically these kind of covert communication channels. So I think this one's very, very important. So this is all about the exfiltration of data. Somebody gets in and without your knowledge, they're slowly found, opened up or spun up an FTP server, and they're sending out data out of your network. And most people are more concentrated on what's coming in instead of what's going out. So they get so concentrated on that they may miss these types of things. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. I will say most endpoint protection these days does some sort of scanning for these types of covert channels. I think Sentinel-1 does it. I think I know CrowdStrike does it. There's several others out there that can be implemented, kind of looking for these kind of covert channels. I think there may, if I'm not mistaken, when I was talking to one of my clients, I think there may be a price point for the module itself that looks for those covert types of channels. But I think this one's really, really important to be looking for. And this one, again, this one's not going to go implement until 2025, but that's right around the corner. So we're talking about, just 12 months from now. So this is something that folks should go ahead and be, pricing out, looking for the types of vendors that can supply this type of scanning or egress monitoring or whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that would be the first thing to do. If you have no idea around that one, just go start looking at your IDS or IPS and see, there's a good chance they have the capability. Even if you're not maybe subscribed to it yet, you should be able to get it. And that would be the best way to go about trying to get that one in place.
Yep.
And I think with that, really the last big change is 11.6 around payment pages. That's the biggest change in general is all the new payment page requirements, both in requirement 6 and now in 11.6. And the main one is 11.6.1, and it's having a change or tamper detection mechanism to basically monitor your payment pages. And the easiest way to think about this, because I know it's hard to is for some people to get their head around. It's not like a FIM solution on your web server. It's something that is essentially seeing what your website would look like to your customer. That's what you want to know, is something, essentially, if you were man in the middling your website between your web server and the customer and seeing what they're seeing, making sure that it looks the way you expect. So that way, as your website is being built, maybe you're pulling in JavaScript libraries, pulling in third-party code or whatever, that in that process, you're not also pulling in vulnerabilities or things are getting modified in ways which you don't want it to be modified. That's what this detection should be looking for, and essentially verifying to make sure that the page is being served up as you expect it to be served up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to do this, without having to buy tools. There's some manual processes. There's some much like with 6.4.3, you could do like content security policies. They're kind of watching those pages. This can all be done. Again, if you don't have, a lot to monitor, you're not looking, hey, we have one web page and, we're monitoring it this way, then there's some ways to kind of do that. However, there are some great tools out there. One tool that I've seen implemented in several different places that will take care of 6.4.3 as well as 11.6.1 is Reflectiz. It's kind of a weird spelling of reflects, but it's Reflectiz, and it's it does a pretty good job doing that. I've seen that implemented in one of the Fortune 50 companies that I've done. But I will say if you've got a large environment, a lot of e-commerce platforms that you're taking payments, then this may be an option for you to look at in order to simply implement it, and you can, be compliant. If you have a small environment, one e-commerce page, then maybe be looking at something like content security policies or something along those lines to kind of to hit this one.
Yeah, and it's getting to the point now, enough organizations I feel like are having difficulty with 643 and 1161 that you can literally just go Google, PCI 643 1161, and you're going to find a page worth of, different solution providers out there that are now saying they can meet this, kind of to Andy's point. I've seen, people meeting it with Akamai. There's I can't remember. There's another one I've seen out there, and there's even people that are, using the tools that are historically more so used by, kind of front end developers and doing web monitoring stuff that now can be kind of back ended into doing some of this change and detection monitoring as well. So there's a lot of options out there. It's really just trying to figure out what makes the most sense to your organization.
Yeah, and you mentioned Akamai. That's one that if you already have Akamai as kind of your your web base out there, which you're going to have to do as part of 4.0 anyway. That's going to be great to go ahead and be able to implement something like that, because that's easily done.
Yeah, that's just at that similar like to the covert channels. Before you start looking at brand new tools, look at what tools you have, and maybe you can just enable another widget, and there you go, and you're covered.
That's it.
It's always worth a Google. It's always worth a Google. That's the phrase.
Or hey, you can always ask ChatGPT too. Say, hey,
there you go.
There it is.
1161 for me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Doesn't GPT-4 connect to the internet, or is it still on an older train? Okay, as I'll say.
GPT-4 does if you have a paid for subscription.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, everybody, get your paid for subscription, then ask. Then ask for it.
I got mine.
That's funny. That's funny. I do have one question. So, how many PCI 4.0 compliant scans would an organization or someone have to have before their first PCI DSS assessment?
All right. So there's been some conversation and back and forth about some of this. Now, let me clarify. So with April 1st, that's for us as of the time of this podcast. That's going to be next week. Let's say that person is they're going to have their rock date April 15th or April. Let's say they're going to do the 4.0 and have it that first month. They're going to have it. Would we expect to see 4 scans of internal vulnerability scans like that, or all these different pieces? No, we would expect to see 1 at least. So this came up as a topic of conversation several times because there was a little bit of a debate because I don't feel like the council was clear at first. They did come up with some clarification after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, one of my clients, this question came up last week. April 1st, their assessment is not until fall. So do they just have to have one scan, or are they expected to have four? No, I like what would make sense. Whatever cadence that your scans are running or your reviews are running, whatever that may be, those time sensitive things. April 1st, let's say you ran right on April 1st for some sort of quarterly thing, then I would expect 90 to 93 days later, I would expect to see another one. And then 90 to 93 days after that, I would expect to see another one. So by the time your fall assessment comes around, how many would I expect to see? 3. So the QSA needs to keep all those things in mind while they're doing that. But the merchants, service providers, like, hey, how many are we going to have to provide? Do we have to provide them all now? Should we have been doing this starting now, or what's the deals?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is just ideally as soon as, April 1st, rolls around, you start doing all the 4.0 things you need to do. Ultimately, when it comes down to doing that assessment, the absolute minimum you're ever going to get by with on any requirement when you're doing a brand new one is you have to have at least one, whatever it is, for us to look back and see the process and then have the process going forward to show that you'll continue doing them going forward. And that's just kind of been historically from PCI's perspective, whenever you need to have a new requirement assessed, that's the bare minimum, at least have one, whatever that item or whatever that activity was completed, and a process to make sure it continues going forward.
All right.
But make sure when 2025 comes around and everything is in place, and let's say it's one of those review things that I just said. Please don't come to us and say, well, you said one. No, we said one as of the date that it went into effect. We should at least have one then. That if everything goes in 2025, April 1st, 2025, and everything is supposed to be there, and your assessment isn't until Christmas time, you've had plenty of time to do, multiple scans, multiple reviews, all that type of thing. I mean, it would make sense. And again, as long as the QSA can look at your cadence and say, okay, this makes sense. You're right on track with where you're supposed to be. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to have all 4, but we should be able to follow the cadence of how you're doing things and be able to make a judgment based on, yep, they're going to continue forward. And by the time their next assessment comes around, we're going to have all 4 or biannually, whatever that may be.
Okay, cool. So by the time that you're doing your first 4.0 assessment, I will come to you with 23 scans. Ready in hand, ready to go. No, guys, no, don't take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Don't listen to me. Anyway, all right, cool. So I guess that kind of wraps up requirement 11 for us, doesn't it?
Yep.
All right. That was a quick one right there. And then we're on to the ever so infamous and the last but not least, requirement 12. It'll be next month. I know it'll be next month. It'll be here before you know it in 2025. Just like 2024, whenever you mentioned 2025. It seems like just yesterday that we started talking about this stuff back in, what was it, 2023?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back in 2020. It was just last year. Oh my gosh. But yeah,
back a long time ago.
Way back. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode today. We'll look forward to hearing, or I guess not hearing, but speaking with you again here next month about requirement 12. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you guys coming on.
Absolutely.
And we will see you guys on the next episode.